People say destiny knocks only once. Mine didn't knock at all. It crashed straight into me wearing an expensive suit. Until that Friday evening, I believed my future would look exactly like my past. Ordinary, predictable, safe. I was 26 years old, worked as an event coordinator in Manhattan, and spent more time worrying about delayed catering deliveries than dramatic love stories. My apartment in Queens barely fit my furniture. My 10-year-old Honda made a strange noise every time I drove over 40 miles per hour, and my biggest luxury was ordering takeout after surviving another exhausting week. I liked my life that way. Quiet people rarely became part of extraordinary stories. The Ashford Grand Hotel sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers as New York's wealthiest guests gathered for one of the city's largest charity galas. Everything had to be flawless. The seating charts, the lighting, the music, even the timing of every speech had been rehearsed down to the second. I moved through the ballroom carrying a digital tablet in one hand and a radio clipped to my waist, answering questions from vendors while reassuring anxious volunteers that everything was under control. It wasn't glamorous work, but I loved the feeling of creating perfect evenings for other people. Nobody noticed the event coordinator unless something went wrong. That was exactly how I preferred it. The ballroom hummed with quiet conversations, polished shoes crossed marble floors without a sound, and a string quartet played softly beneath the laughter of politicians, business executives, and philanthropists. I glanced at my watch. 7:43. Right on schedule. My phone buzzed with another message from the florist asking where to place the final centerpiece. I turned quickly, trying to answer while weaving between guests. Someone stepped backward without looking. We collided shoulder first. My balance disappeared instantly. The tablet slipped from my hand, spinning toward the floor. I reached forward instinctively to stop myself from falling. Instead, I stumbled directly into a man standing only inches away. Before either of us could react, my lips brushed lightly against his cheek. The entire accident lasted less than a second. I stepped back immediately, horrified by what had just happened. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Heat rushed into my face as I bent to retrieve my tablet. I wasn't watching where I was going. Another hand reached down before I could pick it up. Long fingers lifted the device effortlessly before offering it back to me. Thank you, I whispered, finally looking up. The stranger was taller than anyone else nearby, easily 6'3", dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that looked custom-made. Dark hair framed a face that seemed carved from stone, while calm gray eyes studied me with unsettling composure. He didn't appear annoyed. He didn't even seem surprised. If anything, he looked quietly curious. It was an accident, I explained again, embarrassed beyond words. He gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. I know. His voice was calm, low, and unexpectedly gentle. Before I could apologize again, someone called my name across the ballroom. Emma, we need you near the stage. I forced an awkward smile toward the stranger. Sorry again. Then I hurried away, praying I would never see him again. I buried myself in work, determined to erase the humiliating moment from my memory. 20 minutes later, the keynote speech ended. Soft applause echoed through the ballroom. Then, without warning, conversations faded into silence. I looked up in confusion. Every guest had turned toward the main entrance. The same stranger walked calmly through the center of the room. Nobody blocked his path. Influential executives stepped aside. Hotel management straightened instantly. Even security guards subtly adjusted their posture as he passed. Beside me, another coordinator stared with wide eyes before grabbing my arm. Emma, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Please tell me you didn't just touch that man. I frowned, still confused. Why? She swallowed hard before answering. Because that's Damian Romano, the most feared mafia boss alive. I stood perfectly still, unable to connect the calm stranger I had accidentally kissed with the whispered name now echoing through the ballroom. Damian Romano. I had heard that name before, though never in ordinary conversations. It appeared in unfinished sentences, lowered voices, and nervous glances whenever powerful people believed nobody else was listening. No newspaper ever explained why he carried such influence. Yet everyone seemed to understand that his presence alone could change the atmosphere of an entire room. I looked back toward him, expecting someone intimidating or theatrical. Instead, Damian greeted charity board members with quiet confidence, shook hands with donors, and thanked the event host with effortless courtesy. He wasn't loud. He didn't demand attention. Somehow, attention followed him anyway. The entire ballroom seemed to move according to his pace. Guests naturally stepped aside before he reached them. Hotel executives straightened their posture the moment he walked past. Even experienced security personnel watched him with careful respect. Nothing about his behavior matched the frightening image people had built around his name. That contradiction unsettled me more than the rumors themselves. Emma, my supervisor's voice pulled me back to reality. The live auction starts in 3 minutes. We need you backstage. I'm coming. I forced myself to focus. Auction paddles needed arranging. The guest speaker required another microphone check. A last-minute seating change delayed the opening by exactly 90 seconds. Familiar problems grounded me. They belonged to my world. Every now and then I caught myself glancing across the ballroom, only to find Damian already engaged in another quiet conversation. He never searched for me. He never acknowledged what had happened between us. The accidental kiss had obviously meant nothing to him. That realization should have comforted me. Instead, it somehow disappointed me in ways I couldn't explain. Shortly after 10 o'clock, the gala finally ended. Guests slowly collected their coats while photographers packed away expensive cameras. Volunteers folded table linens, and the hotel staff began transforming the glamorous ballroom back into an empty event space. I carried a stack of registration folders toward the employee hallway, grateful the evening was finally over. As I reached the service corridor, someone politely stepped into my path. It wasn't Damian. It was an older gentleman wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. Silver hair, calm blue eyes. The kind of person who looked as though he had never raised his voice in his entire life. "Miss Carter," he asked respectfully. "Yes. My name is Victor." He offered a small business card that displayed nothing except his first name and a phone number. "Mr. Romano asked me to thank you for your professionalism this evening." I blinked in confusion. Professionalism? He appreciated the way you handled an unfortunate accident without creating unnecessary attention. My face immediately warmed again. "Please tell him I'm incredibly sorry." Victor smiled faintly. He already knows. Before I could respond, he reached into his jacket and removed a small cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax. "He also asked me to give you this after the event concluded." I looked at the envelope without taking it. "What's inside?" "Only Mr. Romano can answer that." "I don't think accepting this is a good idea." Victor never seemed offended. "Then you are free to decline." He remained perfectly still, patiently holding the envelope while allowing me to decide. Curiosity eventually defeated caution. I accepted it carefully, surprised by how heavy such a small envelope felt. "Is there anything I need to do?" I asked. "Only read it somewhere private." He gave a polite nod before turning to leave. After only 2 steps, he paused without looking back. "Miss Carter." "Yes." "You believe tonight ended with an accident." My heartbeat quietly quickened. "Didn't it?" Victor's answer came almost as a whisper. "Unfortunately, several people in that ballroom believe it was the beginning of something far more important." I waited until I reached my apartment before opening the envelope. The subway ride back to Queens felt unusually quiet, even though it was packed with tired commuters heading home after another long week. My thoughts never left the ballroom. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Damian Romano's calm expression, the way the entire room had instinctively moved aside for him, and Victor's final warning echoing through my mind. Several people believed that one accidental kiss meant something important. I couldn't understand why. My apartment welcomed me with familiar silence. The old radiator clicked softly against the wall, and the scent of vanilla from the candle I had forgotten to blow out the previous morning lingered faintly in the air. Everything looked exactly as I had left it, comforting in its ordinary simplicity. I placed my purse on the kitchen counter, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the cream-colored envelope for almost 5 full minutes before finally breaking the dark blue wax seal. Inside rested a single folded card made from thick ivory paper. No signature, no expensive logo, no unnecessary decoration. Only one sentence typed neatly across the center. "You did nothing wrong tonight. Please don't blame yourself for an accident." I read it twice before quietly setting the card back onto the table. It wasn't mysterious. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't threatening. Somehow that made it even more confusing. Why would someone surrounded by so much influence take the time to reassure a complete stranger? Before I could think any further, My phone rang. My best friend Olivia. Tell me the rich people behaved themselves tonight. She joked the moment I answered. I laughed softly. Not exactly. That bad. You could say that. For a brief moment, I almost told her everything. The accidental kiss. The whispered name. The envelope, now sitting on my kitchen table. Instead, I changed the subject, asking about her weekend plans and listening while she complained about hospital paperwork. When the call ended, normal life felt wonderfully close again. By Saturday morning, I had convinced myself the entire experience would soon become nothing more than an unusual memory. I followed my usual routine, stopping by the neighborhood coffee shop before walking toward the local grocery store a few blocks away. The crisp autumn air carried the smell of fresh bread from the bakery across the street. Everything felt comfortably familiar until I noticed a black SUV parked beside the curb directly opposite the store. It wasn't unusual to see expensive vehicles in New York, but something about this one caught my attention. The driver remained inside, reading a newspaper instead of looking at his phone. As I walked into the grocery store, I glanced back once more. The SUV hadn't moved. I filled my basket with milk, eggs, pasta, fresh vegetables, and coffee before joining the checkout line. When the cashier finished scanning my groceries, she smiled warmly. You're all set. I reached for my wallet. I haven't paid yet. She looked surprised. The gentleman ahead of you already covered everything. My stomach tightened. Which gentleman? She pointed toward the front entrance. Dark suit. He left about 30 seconds ago. I hurried outside just in time to see the black SUV pulling smoothly into traffic. Standing beside the passenger door was Victor. He looked directly at me, gave a respectful nod, then climbed into the vehicle before it disappeared around the corner. I stood frozen on the sidewalk holding 2 grocery bags, unable to decide whether I should feel grateful or alarmed. When I finally returned home, another surprise waited for me. My elderly landlord smiled as she handed me a small white box tied with a navy ribbon. A polite gentleman asked me to make sure you received this. Inside wasn't jewelry or anything extravagant. It was a compact personal safety alarm and another handwritten note containing only one sentence. Some people noticed what happened that night. Until they lose interest, please don't walk home alone. At that moment, I finally realized Damian Romano wasn't protecting me because of what had happened between us. He was protecting me because other people had been watching it happen too. By Monday morning, I had accepted one simple truth. Ignoring Damian Romano wasn't going to return my life to normal. The envelope, the groceries, and the quiet warning outside my apartment all pointed toward the same conclusion. Someone believed I had suddenly become important, and Damian was trying to make sure that misunderstanding never turned into something worse. I left my apartment just after 7, carrying my usual coffee and trying to convince myself today would finally feel ordinary. Queens looked exactly as it always had. Parents hurried children toward school buses, delivery trucks blocked narrow streets, and commuters rushed toward the subway without noticing anyone around them. For a few peaceful minutes, I almost believed the strange weekend had been nothing more than an overactive imagination. The illusion disappeared the moment I arrived at my office in Midtown. My morning was swallowed by venue contracts, seating revisions, and an endless stream of client emails. Familiar work steadied my thoughts. Deadlines made sense. Budgets made sense. None of them involved mysterious strangers or whispered rumors. Shortly after noon, our receptionist appeared beside my desk wearing an unusually uncertain expression. Emma, there's a gentleman downstairs asking for you. My heartbeat quickened instantly. Did he give a name? She nodded. Victor. I closed my laptop and followed her into the lobby. Victor stood near the entrance exactly as composed as ever, dressed in another perfectly tailored navy suit. He smiled politely when he saw me approach. Good afternoon, Miss Carter. I folded my arms before he could speak again. I need this to stop. He listened without interrupting. The gifts, the messages, the groceries. Whatever this is, I didn't ask for it. His expression remained calm. I understand. Then tell Mr. Romano I appreciate the concern, but I don't need someone arranging my life. Victor nodded thoughtfully. Your message will be delivered. I sighed in frustration. That's not enough anymore. I want to know why he's doing all this. For the first time since we had met, Victor hesitated. Only for a brief moment. Because after the gala, several people reached the wrong conclusion. About what? About you. I frowned. They believe you matter to Mr. Romano. I almost laughed. We exchanged maybe 20 words. Facts rarely change assumptions. His answer came quietly, carrying the weight of long experience. Then why doesn't he simply tell everyone it was an accident? Victor glanced toward the busy street outside before answering. People who spend their lives searching for weakness rarely believe simple explanations. His words settled heavily between us. So what am I supposed to do? I asked. He reached into his jacket and removed a cream-colored card. There was no company name, no title, only an address overlooking the Hudson River with one handwritten line beneath it. Wednesday, 7 o'clock. I stared at the invitation without taking it. He wants to meet me? Victor nodded. Mr. Romano believes honest conversations are better than unanswered questions. And if I refuse, he will respect your decision completely. I finally accepted the card, turning it over in my hands. Can I ask you something? Of course. Is he really the man everyone says he is? Victor smiled faintly, though sadness briefly crossed his face. Miss Carter, most people know Mr. Romano's reputation. Very few have ever taken the time to know the man. He gave a courteous nod before quietly leaving the building. I remained standing in the lobby, staring at the address written across the small card. Every sensible part of me knew I should throw it away and return to the safe, predictable life I had always wanted. Instead, I slipped it carefully into my coat pocket, already realizing I would be standing at that address on Wednesday evening, because the only person who could explain why one accidental kiss had quietly changed both of our lives had finally invited me to hear the truth from him directly. Wednesday felt longer than every workday before it. I answered emails without remembering what I had written, approved floral arrangements I barely looked at, and checked the clock so often that my assistant finally laughed and asked if I had somewhere important to be. I smiled and blamed it on another deadline, but the truth sat quietly inside my coat pocket. The cream-colored invitation never left my thoughts. By 6:30 that evening, I stood outside the address Victor had given me. Instead of the fortress I had imagined, I found an elegant townhouse overlooking the Hudson River. Warm lights glowed through tall windows, maple trees lined the sidewalk, and the entire place felt unexpectedly peaceful. There were no towering gates, no dramatic display of security, only quiet confidence. Before I reached the front door, it opened. Victor greeted me with the same calm expression. "Good evening, Miss Carter." I nodded cautiously. I almost turned around twice. A faint smile appeared on his face. "Mr. Romano expected you might." He stepped aside, inviting me inside. The house surprised me immediately. Rich oak floors stretched beneath soft lighting. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled the walls instead of expensive trophies. Classical music played quietly in the background, blending with the gentle sound of rain against the windows. Framed landscape photographs replaced extravagant artwork, and the entire home carried the scent of freshly brewed coffee instead of polished luxury. It felt lived in, comfortable, human. "Mr. Romano is waiting in the library," Victor said before disappearing down another hallway. I walked slowly toward the open doorway, taking one deep breath before stepping inside. Damian stood beside a wide window overlooking the river, one hand resting lightly on the back of a leather chair. He wasn't wearing the formal black suit from the gala. Instead, he wore a charcoal sweater over a white dress shirt, making him appear far less intimidating than the man I remembered from the ballroom. He turned as I entered. "Thank you for coming, Emma. I came because I want answers." He nodded once. "You deserve them." He gestured toward two chairs beside a quiet fireplace. "Would you like coffee? Maybe after we talk." "Fair enough." I remained standing. "Why are you protecting me?" Damian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out toward the rain falling over the Hudson before speaking. "Because people watched what happened at the gala. It was an accident." "I know. Then why does everyone keep acting like it wasn't?" He met my eyes. "Because in my world, people don't believe accidents happen around me." I frowned. "That's ridiculous." "Perhaps." His voice remained calm. "But they believe anyone who reaches me without permission must have done so for a reason." I folded my arms. "So now strangers think I'm important to you?" "Yes." "Even though we didn't know each other?" "Yes." I shook my head in disbelief. "Then tell them they're wrong." A faint smile crossed his face, though it never reached his eyes. People searching for weakness rarely accept simple truths. The room grew quiet. Finally, I asked the question that had stayed with me since the gala. Why didn't you ignore me like everyone expected? Damian considered the question carefully. Because you apologized before you knew my name. You treated me like an ordinary man. I blinked. That's because I thought you were one. Exactly. Something in his expression softened. Very few people ever do. My eyes wandered toward a framed photograph resting on the bookshelf. It showed Damian sitting beside an elderly woman on a park bench, both smiling naturally while feeding birds. Your grandmother? I asked. He looked toward the picture with unmistakable warmth. She taught me never to mistake respect for fear. Before I could respond, Victor quietly entered the library carrying a phone. Sir, he said respectfully, our team intercepted new information. Damian accepted the phone, read the screen, and the warmth disappeared from his face. He slowly looked back at me. Emma, he said quietly, someone has started asking where you work, where you live, and who you spend time with. The room fell completely silent after Damian's words. I searched his face, hoping I would find reassurance instead of concern, but all I saw was someone quietly carrying a burden he had expected to arrive sooner or later. Because of one accident, I asked softly. Damian placed the phone on the nearby desk before answering. Because people refused to believe it was an accident. I shook my head slowly. I still don't understand. He walked toward the window, overlooking the dark river, keeping his voice calm. In my world, every conversation, every meeting, every unexpected encounter is examined until someone decides it has a hidden meaning. People spend years searching for weaknesses. They convince themselves that nothing happens without purpose. I looked toward the framed photograph of his grandmother before returning my attention to him. So now they think I'm your weakness. Yes. But they don't know me. They don't need to. His answer came without hesitation. They only need to believe I care enough to protect you. I folded my arms, trying to process everything. And do you? For the first time that evening, Damian didn't answer immediately. He looked directly into my eyes, then quietly admitted, yes. My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. There was no dramatic declaration in his voice. No attempt to impress me. Only quiet honesty. Why? I whispered. A faint smile appeared. Because after everything that happened, you still came here looking for answers instead of running away. The room became strangely peaceful again. Rain continued tapping gently against the tall windows while the fireplace filled the silence with soft crackling sounds. Victor quietly disappeared, giving us privacy once more. I finally accepted the cup of coffee Damian had offered earlier. It was rich, warm, and surprisingly comforting. This is probably the best coffee I've ever had, I admitted. He smiled slightly. I hoped you'd think so. I laughed for the first time since entering the townhouse. You know, you're nothing like the person everyone describes. Damian leaned back in his chair. Most people never stay long enough to find out. We spent the next hour talking about ordinary things. My work organizing charity events. His favorite bookstores. The best pizza in Brooklyn. Childhood memories. The first job I ever had. The conversation flowed naturally, almost making me forget who he was supposed to be. Gradually, the image built by endless rumors disappeared, replaced by someone thoughtful, patient, and surprisingly easy to talk to. I realized something unexpected. Damian listened far more than he spoke. Whenever I mentioned my family, he remembered every detail. Whenever I joked about my unreliable Honda, he laughed quietly instead of pretending not to understand. Somewhere between those simple conversations, I stopped feeling like I was sitting across from the city's most feared man. I was simply sharing coffee with someone who had spent too many years being misunderstood. Eventually I stood, realizing how late it had become. I should go. Damian walked me to the front door himself. Outside, the rain had ended, leaving the sidewalks shining beneath golden streetlights. My rideshare waited quietly along the curb. Before opening the car door, I turned back toward him. Thank you. He tilted his head slightly. For what? For telling me the truth. He nodded once. Thank you for believing it. I smiled before climbing into the car. As we pulled away, I glanced through the rear window. Damian remained standing beneath the entrance light until the townhouse disappeared behind the curve of the road. My phone vibrated less than 3 minutes later. I expected another message from Damian. Instead, an unknown number appeared. Attached was a photograph taken from somewhere across the street. It showed Damian watching my car leave his home. Beneath the image was a single sentence that immediately erased the warmth of the evening. We knew he would watch you leave. Now we know he always will. The anonymous photograph stayed on my phone for the rest of the ride home. I didn't delete it. I didn't answer it. I simply stared at the image until I finally understood what I had been missing from the beginning. Whoever kept sending these messages wasn't interested in frightening me. They wanted Damian to believe I needed constant protection. They wanted every decision he made to revolve around me. That realization followed me into my apartment and refused to leave. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered Damian standing beneath the warm light outside his townhouse, completely unaware that someone across the street had been studying his every move. By sunrise, I had stopped thinking like the frightened woman who accidentally walked into someone else's complicated world. I started thinking like the event coordinator who solved problems by looking for patterns. Thursday morning, I spread every message, photograph, and handwritten note across my kitchen table. Dates, times, locations. One by one, I wrote them into a notebook beside my coffee. An unexpected pattern slowly emerged. Every anonymous message had arrived while Damian was attending an important public meeting, a charity function, or a scheduled business appointment. None appeared when he was spending quiet evenings at home. None arrived during private weekends. Whoever was behind them always chose moments when they knew Damian would be forced to decide whether to leave an important responsibility or ignore what appeared to be a threat against me. They weren't chasing me. They were testing him. My phone rang just before noon. Damian. Good morning, he said quietly. Did you sleep? I smiled faintly. Not much. Because of the message? No. I looked at the notebook on my table. Because I finally understand it. Silence settled between us. Tell me, he said. This has never been about making me afraid. I answered. It's about making you react. Another long pause followed. Go on. Every message arrives when you're somewhere important. Every warning is timed to interrupt your schedule. They're trying to train you to abandon everything whenever my name appears. I heard him exhale slowly. Victor reached the same conclusion an hour ago. Then stop doing what they expect. Emma. His voice softened. You realize what you're asking. I'm asking you to trust me the same way you've asked me to trust you. The line became completely quiet. Finally, he laughed softly, not because anything was amusing, but because something had suddenly become obvious. You're the first person who's ever told me to protect my judgment instead of my reputation. Maybe because your reputation isn't what needs protecting. He remained silent for another moment before answering. Thank you. We ended the call, and for the first time since the gala, I felt completely calm. That evening, as I left the office, I found Victor waiting beside the familiar black SUV. Instead of approaching immediately, he simply handed me a slim folder. Inside was a timeline matching every anonymous message with Damian's public schedule. It confirmed exactly what I had discovered. I looked back at Victor. They wanted him distracted. He nodded. And now they know that plan no longer works. I closed the folder carefully. Good. A faint smile appeared on his usually composed face. Mr. Romano said you would figure it out eventually. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated again. Another unknown message appeared. There was no photograph this time. No warning. Only one sentence. She understands the game now. I locked the screen without replying. For the first time since everything began, I realized the balance had quietly shifted. They were no longer watching an ordinary woman who had accidentally kissed the wrong man. They were watching someone who had just uncovered the real trap behind that unforgettable night. Friday arrived with a strange sense of clarity. For the first time since the charity gala, I wasn't waiting for the next anonymous message. I already knew what it would try to accomplish. Fear had stopped working, so whoever stood behind those carefully timed interruptions would have to find another strategy. I refused to help them. My morning unfolded exactly as planned. I met clients, approved final venue layouts, and laughed with my coworkers over burnt office coffee. Every ordinary moment felt like a quiet victory because I finally understood what Damian had been trying to protect from the beginning. Not my safety alone, my normal life. Shortly after lunch, my phone buzzed. It was Damian. How's your day? He asked. I smiled before answering. Surprisingly ordinary. Good. And yours? Busy. I could hear distant conversations in the background before the room around him became quiet. I wanted to tell you something before you heard it from someone else. I leaned back in my chair. What happened? I'm attending another charity reception tonight. I waited. You sound like you're expecting me to object. A quiet laugh escaped him. A few days ago, you probably would have. Not anymore. He remained silent for a moment. Why? Because now I know the difference between protecting someone and being manipulated through them. Another brief silence followed. Victor was right. About what? He said you'd understand faster than anyone expected. I looked through the office window at the Manhattan skyline. Then don't cancel your evening because of me. I wasn't planning to. Good. I smiled softly. That means you're finally listening. His voice carried genuine warmth when he answered. I am. We ended the call with an ease that hadn't existed only. Days earlier, that evening I met Olivia for dinner at a small Italian restaurant overlooking Central Park. We talked about work, family, and the upcoming holidays. I deliberately left my phone inside my purse. For once, I wanted to enjoy an evening without waiting for another interruption. Nearly an hour passed before the familiar vibration finally came. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Olivia noticed my expression. Everything okay? Actually, I said calmly, I think it is. I opened the message. There was no photograph this time. No dramatic warning. Only one sentence. He chose the event instead of choosing you. I smiled instead of panicking. Olivia looked confused. That's good news. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my purse. Better than good. She laughed. You're going to have to explain that someday. Maybe. I changed the subject, and we finished dinner talking about travel plans instead of mysterious strangers. Around 9:30, another message arrived. This one came from Damian. Just finished. The event went exactly as planned. Hope you're having a nice evening. I answered for the first time since everything had begun. Dinner was wonderful. Congratulations on ignoring the distractions. Less than a minute later, he replied. I couldn't have done it without someone reminding me what really mattered. I stared at the message longer than I expected. Somewhere between an accidental kiss and countless misunderstandings, we had quietly learned to trust each other without making promises either of us wasn't ready to keep. As Olivia and I stepped outside, light snow began drifting across Central Park, covering the sidewalks in a thin layer of white. The city suddenly felt peaceful again. My phone vibrated one final time before I slipped it into my coat pocket. Another unknown sender. Another single sentence. We underestimated her influence on his decisions. I looked up at the falling snow, then quietly deleted the message without reading it twice. They still believed I had become Damian Romano's weakness. What they still failed to understand was that I had become the reason he no longer made the decisions they expected. Winter settled. Over New York one quiet day at a time, and with it came something neither Damian nor I had expected. Silence. The anonymous messages became less frequent, then disappeared altogether. The carefully timed photographs stopped arriving. Whoever had tried so hard to manipulate us finally understood that their strategy had failed. Fear only controls people who stop trusting each other. And somewhere between one accidental kiss and countless unanswered questions, Damian and I had learned to trust without needing promises. Life gradually returned to its familiar rhythm. I still coordinated charity galas, argued with caterers about delivery times, and drove my aging Honda through morning traffic while promising myself I would finally replace it next year. Damian continued carrying responsibilities I knew I would never fully understand, yet he no longer allowed every unexpected event to dictate his decisions. Instead of reacting to every distraction, he focused on what truly mattered. Strangely enough, that single change seemed to quiet everything around him. A few months later, another charity fundraiser brought us back to the very hotel where our story had begun. Walking through those crystal-covered halls felt almost surreal. The polished marble floors reflected elegant gowns. Soft music drifted across the ballroom, and guests greeted one another with the same practiced smiles I remembered from that unforgettable night. The only difference was me. Months earlier, I had walked through those doors hoping nobody noticed the event coordinator rushing between tables. Tonight, I entered beside Damian without feeling the need to explain anything to anyone. People looked. Of course they did. Some whispered quietly before returning to their conversations. Others simply smiled politely. I realized something important. Their opinions no longer mattered because they no longer defined my reality. During the reception, an elderly woman approached us carrying a small donation envelope. She smiled warmly before turning toward me. You organized the children's literacy fundraiser last spring, didn't you? I nodded, surprised she remembered. Yes. My granddaughter attended because of your work. She squeezed my hand gently. Thank you. When she walked away, I looked at Damian. She didn't ask who I was with. He smiled softly. She already saw who you are. Later that evening, we stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the Hudson River. Fresh snow drifted gently through the cold air, while the city lights shimmered across the water exactly as they had the night I first visited his home. We stood quietly for several moments before Damian spoke. Do you ever think about that first night? I laughed softly. The one where I nearly died from embarrassment. He smiled. That one. I looked out across the glowing skyline. Sometimes. Do you wish it had never happened? I turned toward him, already knowing my answer. No. Even knowing everything you know now. Especially because of what I know now. He studied me with the same calm gray eyes I had first seen across a crowded ballroom. What changed your mind? I smiled. I spent weeks believing I had accidentally kissed the most feared man alive. I paused before continuing. What I actually discovered was someone who never asked to be feared in the first place. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he quietly admitted, and I spent years believing nobody would ever see beyond the stories. Without thinking, I reached for his hand. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't meant for anyone watching. It simply felt natural, warm, honest. The same quiet certainty that had slowly grown between us since the night fate interrupted two completely different lives. Looking back now, I understand that the greatest surprise was never learning who Damian Romano really was. The greatest surprise was realizing how easily the world mistakes reputation for truth. One accidental kiss had started a rumor powerful enough to change countless assumptions, but it also created something far stronger than fear. It created trust between two strangers who refused to let other people decide who they should become. Sometimes destiny doesn't arrive with perfect timing or carefully written plans. Sometimes it appears as one awkward mistake, one unexpected meeting, and one simple choice to look beyond the legend until all that's left is the person standing quietly in front of you.